Welcome, everyone. This is the Topeka City Council Social Service Grants Committee. This is September 19th at 10:30 a.m. This is the Classroom A at the Law Enforcement Center in Topeka, Kansas. My name is Jeff Cohen. I'm the chair, and we have in attendance Councilman Padilla, and I think Councilman Lesser is on his way. He indicated that he'll be here. So I'll call this meeting to order, and first item up is the discussion to outsource the social service grants process. Where do we like to start with this? Do you want to take it and start us off?
Well, staff had a early discussion with you, Councilmember Cohen. You had expressed interest in exploring the idea of outsourcing the social service grant award process, or the management of that system, to another entity in the community that does like work.
Okay.
There are a few that are making grants in the community. So staff's done a little bit of preliminary work to kind of figure out how you all would go about that.
Okay.
Obviously, you'd have to have the support or a majority of your colleagues on the city council vote to approve that change to our system. Legal department indicates that the actual issuance of an RFP and selection of a agency to administer the grants could be carried out by the city manager. What he would need from the governing body is the direction to do that, to go and solicit proposals and make that transition. So we don't need, if the majority of the city council were in favor, we would not need a resolution or an ordinance to create that or make that happen.
Okay.
We had given you previously an estimate of the dollars spent on staff time. You'd asked for that. That's approximately $52,000 and some change is what we expend
What it cost us to do this process.
annually on staff hours. Most agencies that are going to take on this type of a relationship with the city are going to charge between 2% and 3% of whatever your total fund would be to administer it. But we would have to solicit proposals and get hard prices for you during that process. But that's a good average of what places like the United Way Community Foundation, Community Resource Council are charging for that type of work.
Okay.
So with that,
It's a great background.
that's kind of the summary of how we got to today. We felt like this was a decision point that you all needed to, make a decision. Do you want to recommend this and move it forward to the governing body, or do you want to drop it and just keep the system the way that it is? We've concluded our 2020 selection and recommendation process, so this is your next item of business to make a decision on.
Okay, very good. Committee members, do you have any comments?
I have a question, Sasha and Corey. Before we move or make a decision whether we want to move forward or not, do you have some personal history or experience with having this an outsourced agency handle this, or has it always been done by the city since you've been here? So there's some history about whether or not that worked well or it did not work well.
I don't have any history of it being outsourced. I'm not for sure if the city has done that before or not, but yeah.
Not in your experience.
Not in my experience.
The city does have some other funds that are outsourced into the community to grant out. I'm going to get the name of it wrong, but the water share or and franchise fees are administered by CRC currently for the city of Topeka. So not social service grants, but it is social service funding that goes out to an agency that then administers, allocating that to residents that are eligible. So,
Well, I would ask, if I could, just a brief conversation. I saw Councilwoman Hiller come in, and I know that she's been on the council, I believe, long enough that maybe she could provide some background or history, if not some thoughts on the idea about whether or not this is something we should move forward with. I didn't anticipate that she would be here, but just in a quick conversation, she mentioned she had some history, if the committee would indulge.
Yeah. Will our council historian come up and talk?
And I'm looking at the audience. There may be only one or two in the audience. There is, I guess I need some clarification first. Is there a discussion at hand to just outsource the grant decision process or the entire grant management process?
I think what our issue was is that our process is, the feedback that I had gotten is our process is not very good. The county's process is so much better, whatever that process is. And I think that's just why we're here. I don't think there's any particular thing one way or the other. I think we're just having a conversation to see, is this a direction that we need to go for next year, to make the recipients think that the process is fair and transparent, and that's where we're at.
Okay. The reason I ask is that, just to clarify my comments, but also the history, as far as I know, the grant management has never, ever been contracted out from the city. I was director of a nonprofit and did the funding applications to the city starting as far back as 1975. So I have the experience of being an applicant and going through the process as an applicant. Then I've been on the council since 2009, and it was at about that time and so I've been through a couple of different formats of the process along that way, and it was around 2009 that the council decided that they wanted to bring it in-house, and I can explain that history, and it was because they were not comfortable with how it had been handled when the advisory process was outside the city. So just with that framework, so it's been in, not quite 10 years. And I'll do my best to explain it in some sort of order. The reason to bring it in was that the city had it outsourced to one entity for a long time, and that entity actually included in the grant review process representatives of the general nonprofit. There were just 3 people, I think, on the panel, and for the life of me, I can't ever remember the third, but maybe it was the County Intergovernmental Coordination Office, and United Way had a rep on it. And that process, the lead on it was impartial, was not involved in anybody else's action or funding. And the idea in that over those years was that it was important to make sure that people who were doing, I could probably find some old records of the points. There were points, but it had to do with, is your program important? Are you doing a good job with it? Do you have other funding? How important is the funding from this source? Are there some things that are changing in the community that would make a difference in terms of priorities, those kinds of considerations? That worked pretty well for a long time, but when some staffing changed and that organization changed some, there was some dissatisfaction with that process. There were times, either through that organization and alternately, I think, directly from the city, where they decided to use a citizen review panel get some folks from around the community. Those folks worked very diligently to do a good job in kind of understanding, recommending, and allocating the funds. What they ran into then was that most of those individuals were not familiar with the nonprofit network, were just not familiar with the organizations and the work enough to have kind of that inside track on how to sort it out. What was happening over the years that caused the council to address it, to make a change, was that if people would come to the council anyway, and the council ended up spending more time in their funding allocations hearing testimony from nonprofit after nonprofit. We ended up with a whole session that lasted hours with just the nonprofits giving direct testimony, and then the council, for well-informed reasons as well as political reasons, would change, often, periodically anyway, would change the recommendations. And so it was like, why should we do this? There was this impasse on the part of the council. And so the thought then was to create a process that was very outcomes-oriented, was very empirical about the need and the provision of services and the success in those services, addressing the needs, the performance in terms of grant management, trying to come up with something that was very transparent, very mission-oriented, that would allow a committee, a part of the council itself, to do a deep dive into what was happening in the social services arena and be able to then come up with a recommendation that was solid. And that I was on the committee the first couple of years as we worked on establishing this new process as well, so I went through all the internal stuff there. Ideally, something that would then not go to the council. The first year or two, there was an appeal process in the system. So, and yeah.
I'll stop you right there. I appreciate all this, but I don't really need all of it. I just how long has it been since we've done it? Have we ever done it? Those are just the type of things. I think if we want to get into Laura's discussion about all this stuff, I think that's best for the council, but
Okay.
No disrespect, but I don't really need to
Okay.
hear all this.
And I can switch to that. The reason I mention it is those are the reasons that the council decided to bring it in-house. And
how
they
long?
struggled with that.
How long has it been done in the last 10 years?
No, it was about 10 years ago was the last time it was outsourced. And it was, again, it was only the decision-making process. It was never the grant management, the dollars in and out, as far as I know.
Are there any other questions?
If I can add just a couple of things. Because I'm not defending the process that we have right now. It's not been perfect, and I can offer notes whenever on that as well. What did happen was that periodically the city and the county and United Way would get together, over all those years, and say, let's look at the whole process. How's it working? The senior centers have come up before. They have other funders. There were times when they were under some orders to work together to change like their transportation programs. Didn't necessarily have a system to communicate that clearly. So the city was, and by having a really fixed program, was operating a little bit in a bubble instead of maybe making the best decisions. That's some of what you heard this year. I just want you to know that it's a challenge. If you decide to do something else, it's still going to be very important, I would suggest, based on that history, that the committee and then the council are very specific about what they want to fund and how they want the process to go, so that we don't end up back with a whole night of direct social service hearings. That was what triggered the switch to bringing it in-house. And none of you were there at that point and wanted to make sure just that kind of the time frame history. Again, I can touch on the things that were difficult otherwise along the way. I think you're going to need to address that if you want to suggest a change.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
You're welcome.
So if the process, if we change the process and count the committee members don't like the results, are we still going to derail the process and pick and choose the people that we want to have receive? You know what I mean? I mean, if we have a process, we got to follow it. Otherwise, we shouldn't have a process and we just pick people. You know what I mean?
Not really.
Well, you know, Councilman.
Our recommendations were torpedoed from a committee meeting by the council. And, you know, if we don't have a committee process and we follow it, why do we have a process if we don't follow it? Right.
No, I get that. The next question would be, that I have for Sasha would be, and maybe even the city manager who is here, would we have the opportunity prior to us actually making a recommendation? Because a part of me making a recommendation here from this committee would be to see the results of some of these RFPs, see what the cost would be, see what some of the different, whether it's United Way, whether it's Beacon Community Foundation, whether it's on and on. Do we have the opportunity to do that in this committee prior to go ahead and listen?
I don't believe so. I think that to change the process and go from an internal oversight of that review and selection, you know, we do have a committee that's staffed by community members that are well-versed in that grant arena. But to move away from the system that we're currently using, I believe the city manager would need direction from the governing body to change that process.
Well, and that's not what my question is, actually. I mean, I understand to change the process and to make a recommendation to do that, but part of the due diligence that I would like to do as part of this committee is look at the finances of it before we even go to that point in time.
I don't know if
I don't know why we would not be able to put an RFP out from the committee to solicit bids for consideration and get those back to review them, and then us look at it and say, okay, well, obviously, you know, we have an estimate of $52,000 of staff costs. You know, we have 3 organizations that are all at, I'm just throwing this out there, at 30,000, and I've looked at these type of things. I think this is something now that is worth us moving forward from this committee then to the general council for consideration.
Well, I think with what you're asking is, can we solicit it and see how much it would cost to have an external party do this? Is that really what you're focused on?
Basically, yeah.
I think that we can reach out and see if there are others. But I think, you know, I think probably what we would more than likely do is try and determine who might do it and have them give us a price just to get a ballpark. In other words, rather than solicit a formal RFP, we would contact someone that we feel could meet the need, not unlike we did recently with regards to the foreclosure notice. We found one company that we knew could do it, tried to get what their cost was going to be as a baseline in order for us to know what at least one cost would be before soliciting a formal RFP.
Right.
So we could do that, provide you that information, then you could determine whether or not that financially would be a wash at least, or if it's an additional cost, what's the benefit then? You could then start talking about, does that benefit of having an outside organization meet the additional cost that's going to be involved and what they bring to the table?
That would be more what I'm kind of looking for. I mean, the reality of it is, at the end of the day, kind of like we talked about when we went through this the first time, and when I was saying in support of the committee, is every time we do this, we're going to have some people unhappy, whether
Sure.
we do it, whether they do it, you know.
Right.
So
Well,
that's just the reality of what's going to happen. Something's
Yes.
not going to be fair to somebody, and somebody's going to feel it. And so, to me, that comes down to the economics of looking at if we have a organization that is going to do as well as we could do, blah, blah, and the cost is less, then that's something that I would want to consider. You know, it's not.
Well,
We're not going to find the organization that we're going to do out there that nobody's ever going to complain. That does not exist.
Right.
So,
right, and I think going towards this, really identifying what we want to see. And I know that there was some discussion, and I think that's another step of what you're looking at is what organizations, what funding, what types of organizations are we definitely going to want to fund? You know, if we truly want to fund the senior centers each year, then we need to look at, does that need to be a cordoned off section included? It's a different subject, but I think we can figure out a company, get a cost estimate from them.
there are at
And
least
then
three
that
that we
would then help move the process forward. So then you would know, you're right, we'd know that financial cost. And so then you could decide if the financial cost was substantially more, then we'd have to have a different discussion and really look at, okay, how are we going to change our internal process since we don't want to spend the additional money for an external evaluator firm.
Right, because at the same time, the one thing I would want to recognize during this process is 90% of the people that participated were happy with the process and thought that it was. While there may have been issues that needed to be corrected, 90% of the people who in the program were happy with granted, I understand there's 10% roughly that were not, but let's not throw the process completely under the bus from the standpoint of
Right.
everybody from top to bottom felt that it was a cluster, you know, because that's not the case. Yeah.
Agreed.
Thank you.
So yes, we can get that. Sasha and her team can figure out and getting that estimate to bring to the committee.
Just a couple points to that, along that line. So we did some math before the meeting. Included in your 2020 approved budget is $424,566 for social service grants. 2% of that is $84.91, so $8,491. 3% is $12,737. So if we're accurate on our estimate of 2 to 3%, but we will follow up, there are at least three I can think of that we can get that information from easily.
Yeah, we shouldn't have told them what we were spending.
Yeah, that Councilmember Cohen requested that,
No,
you know, we
I'm
calculate, but I
I'm
get
being
it.
funny.
I got you.
I'm being funny.
Right. So
Price just went up.
to the city manager's comments about if the committee wanted to, say, designate funding for the senior centers or something like that, that would be a part of the work that the committee would do on the priorities, the funding priorities, which when staff started thinking about this, you know, when the conversation came up, we envisioned that same process happening each year to 2 years, that you guys determine what the priorities are for the dollars, and if you wanted to continue to set the formula in which those funds are allocated out to the agencies based on their score. I mean, you would still have as much or as little control of that process as you want. We could talk to outside agencies about just doing that selection, the scoring and recommendation process, and still administer the contracts in-house. We'll still need to monitor the programs that are funded with CDBG funds, because we have to collect that information so that when HUD comes every 2 years to audit us, we have it available. So we wouldn't just be, you know, washing our hands of social service grant funding. But like I'm saying, I do believe you guys could have as much or as little involvement in that process if we were to move forward with this as you'd like.
I still have a question.
Yeah,
Mr.
Councilman
Chair.
Padilla.
And that is, you mentioned and others mentioned how the county does it. How does the county do it? I'm not familiar with
I don't
how
know.
the county does it.
Does anybody here know how the
City
county does
manager,
it?
do you have any idea?
I have not delved into their process, so I couldn't tell you. But we can sure find that out. I mean,
Well, I
that's
appreciate
easy
it.
enough to
And,
figure out.
The comment has been the city.
Talk to
that,
whoever administers their program and
Yeah.
how their process works. I'm
That
sure
the-
some of these might be familiar with it.
Okay.
Agencies might be familiar as well, but we'll get with the right person on their staff, on the county staff, and get a rundown so that we can present that, because it may jar some ideas of how you would like to see it done in the future, or not, for that matter. You already know I don't like that.
Yeah, the only thing, it seems to me that I thought overall, the process did what it was supposed to do. The complaints that I heard that then we could look at from a priority standpoint is, without getting in the weeds too much, is, okay, do we want to establish what our priorities, and our priorities are senior centers, children, whatever you
Right.
establish those to be. And then it becomes, I think, our priority then, do we want to set sub-scoring into those different organizations of saying, these are priorities, this much of this 400 is going to go into this one's going to go into this. Because what's happening, what caused some of the problems, I'll just use the one purpose is comparing one of the for board participation and how many were there, and it's kind of like comparing a Frito-Lay to a smaller 10-person snack company, something like that. I mean, but that lays on us, not on the scoring basis. In my opinion, is that's clearing up. Okay, do we SIP these individuals so we're not comparing these groups with these groups, and that, but that's more of a priority basis and a scoring setup, not that the process didn't work right. It worked right. It worked like it was supposed to be, but it's different for a 4-person board and a 30-person board that creates problems just that are inherent to
And I think
to the nature.
To me, that goes to the weighting that we put in our system.
Right.
And what weighting are we going to place on certain components of it, and that's where the board has to chime in, or the committee has to chime in as to.
And that's where our problem lays, whether or not we do it ourselves or we do the same thing, we give it to one
Right.
of the other outside vendors.
We have to establish that framework
Exactly.
so that whoever's rating it knows how we want it scored.
Exactly.
What's the priority, what concerns us the most about the organization as to whether it's a good organization to provide funding to. And that's really what that boils down to is this a good organization to provide, and what kind of guidelines are we want to say is a good organization that we can trust to spend the money the way we say they are and be a good organization to receive funding.
Thank you.
So do we want to plan to have another meeting in October, and we can get, download on the county process, maybe revise our priorities and figure a new direction forward?
Would we also include what Sasha suggested, that they could give us an idea of who they would approach and what the cost would be, so we would be looking at that too as well?
That's a good idea, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can bring you back some rough estimates. I should add a little footnote to the numbers I gave you earlier, that 2 to 3% is a typical cost if you're going to have someone like the United Way or CRC or Community Foundation house your dollars and administer them, so write the checks. It may be a higher cost if you included the recommendation or review process of applications and administering that, so throw that out there.
Okay.
The only other recommendation I would have when you bring those numbers forward, if we can, if you contact 2, 3, whatever it is, I would say when we come forward next time from the information basis, I would say let's not identify any of the institutions that you spoke with.
Sure, I
I
can
would
do
say,
that.
and let's say if we did 3, that we use an average, of what the 3 were. That way because these ones that we're going to are going to be the same ones that probably, if we do go out, they're going to have that.
Yes.
And I don't know that it's fair competition to have those
We can do
numbers
that.
out there and even them identified.
No problem.
Okay, that sounds good.
So to make sure that I've got my notes right, you want us to bring you back rough estimates on the cost to administer, like the application and review process and make a recommendation of who gets funded. You want us to find out what process Shawnee County is using to do their grant making, and you want us to bring you back the materials that you'll need to start reviewing your priorities for 2021. Is that correct? Okay.
Is everybody else okay with that?
I'm fine with that. I'm not that concerned at this point with the, I mean, I don't know at what time normally the priorities start getting reviewed. I mean,
About now, so
about now.
that
Then I'm fine with that.
by
Yeah.
December, by end of this year, you guys can have that finalized, what you want the process to look like for 2020, because it will be in-house. The soonest
Right.
we could probably do this realistically, if everything worked out right and everybody loved the idea, would be 2021.
Right. Yeah, I would say I'm fine with that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. We don't have a specific meeting date set for October, but would you mind, Liz, looking up, finding a common date that works for everybody on the committee, and then we'll announce that date? Are there any other items before the committee? Okay, the meeting's adjourned. Thanks for coming.